The galactic shaman astrologers are preparing to speak about the fourth house, our ancestry. And I would encourage people to read this book. It's called The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering Religion of the Earth. And this is a classic book. It has our history, which is the her story of the matriarchy, and how we lived for 300,000 years. And it has also science in it that is just amazing to me. So, for instance, we know that to be masculine is a hormonal fight. And so when I found out that to be masculine, you have to put out a hormone and fight for your masculinity when you're in the womb, I was like, oh my gosh, that's where the fight happens against the matriarchy. It starts in the womb. This is astounding to me, and this is our ancestry and our origins, is that for millions of years we were all female, particularly when we were watery creatures. So this feels like ancient Lemuria, when we reproduced from a feminine body, and that in fact all of us were female. Then at some point, after millions of years of all of us being female, the first beings that had like a male organ was the reptoid being. So the reptoid being connected the limbic brain of fight, flight, survival with the male projection of a reproductive organ, the penis. This is astounding me. So our reptoid brain is in that survival mode all the time, so that when we're afraid, we go back to fight principle. And particularly males go back to the fight principle. Astounding to me. So in the mammalian body, the conception is XX female, much easier to conceive a female. XY has to work much harder to penetrate an egg. Then for the first 8 weeks, all of us are female. All of us are. And then the masculine Y chromosome has to fight. It actually has to fight the feminine hormones with a masculine hormone, and it fights aggressively for its right to be masculine. So that is astounding to me. It has to fight for its right to be masculine. And at that time, a lot of the masculine fetuses will abort. They will naturally die because the fight is too difficult. And then at some point, if the growing fetus allows itself to be masculine, it has to continue to produce masculine hormones all the time throughout the pregnancy to maintain its masculine identity. So to be masculine is a fight, and it connects to the limbic brain, the reptoid brain, from when the masculine penis first became a sexual organ of reproduction. Again, for millions of years, we were all female. So that explains a lot to me about our ancestry and origins, is that we were parthenogenetically all female, just reproducing from the female body for millions of years. And then the fight to be a male happened. But with that incredible change, men and women started to make love not just for reproduction, but for relationship by socially engaging one another. And in the fourth house in Hellenistic astrology, Libra rules that fourth house of that relating back and forth. You, me, give, take, harmonize the masculine and the feminine, balance the scales. So that's astounding. Okay, so then the next piece is that we lived in matriarchal tribal regional groups for hundreds of thousands of years, at least 300,000 years. And we were nomadic and we followed the seasons, and women were primarily responsible for food. So 80% of the food came from a woman's hand. She, of course, nursed her baby. She was the life-giving force. And the masculine kind of didn't have that much identity other than hunting and gathering and loving and providing for the feminine. Now, at that time, who the biological father was did not matter. So even most recently, here in the United States, the Haudenosaunee people, the Algonquin, the Iroquois, the Mohawk, and I have my groups all mixed up, but basically the native people of the Northeast, they lived in longhouses, and the children all grew up in a matriarchy, and actually the older brother or the brothers or the uncles raised the children, not the biological father. So the biological father was a consort and a lover, but the woman was never his sexual property, neither was the child. So for a very long time, up until recently, we lived as matriarchal beings. And when Katohayuk was uncovered, they found that most of the people that were buried there were women and children and female children, because again, it was very hard to be a male. So most of our society was women and children. So think about that and how hard it was to be even in a male body and not know what its role was, because women produced 80% of the food, the medicine, the clothing, the baskets, the adornments. If there was pottery, they produced the pottery. They kept the sacred fire going, and the sacred fire was considered the mystic heart of the goddess, and only a woman was allowed to tend to that. So this is amazing to me. This book is amazing. In terms of our true ancestry, fourth house is our ancestry. So understand where we've come from. The next piece is that when the patriarchy, and I think we actually had an invasion of a patriarchal force that was interdimensional, the way that they started to control the planet about 5,000 years ago was across the planet. Basically, this patriarchal force, in the Bible, it was called Yahweh. Yahweh was just an interdimensional. And they really co-opted the males of society to find the women suspicious and scary, and that they had too much power and too much magic, and that they shouldn't be allowed to play those instruments and do that shamanic trance dance, and really men should be in charge. So I learned this from Ulukai Brendan Murray in Australia. His people have had this oral tradition. And in fact, the didgeridoo was a phallus that only women played. So it was a magical instrument. And about 5,000 years ago, that was taken away from women, and only men, even today, only men are allowed to play or touch the didgeridoo, because I was scolded when I was in Australia. And also women were then expelled from the sacred sites. So women are not allowed to go to Katajuta, which is the feminine site of power in the center of Australia. Katajuta is where the water comes up from the springs between those many bumps and humps and mounds that is Katajuta. Meanwhile, all over the planet, the sacred mounds and waterways and wells were being co-opted so that the Pythia and the Delphine oracles were removed or forced to only channel patriarchal power. So Apollo became the sun god, and they wanted information about how to conquer and defeat. So the oracles also were only women, and for a short time an overlap happened where the oracles were still allowed to be female, but they could only receive information from patriarchal God, which was about war and conquering. Now, all that basically started to erase and cause mistrust to the very life-inspiring, matriarchal, cooperative, communal way of living together. Medicine was taken away from women. Dance was taken away. The very act of procreation was taken away. As I wrote in my last blog, Athena was said to be coming out of the crown of her father Zeus. So please read that blog in the galacticshamanastrologers.net website. Go to the blog section and read that story. Now what's happening on the planet is we're having another intervention. So there's a really interesting intervention happening right now. I want to share with you this pet certificate that I went with my daughter. Now, we weren't allowed to go in the building, but our little new kitten was given a vaccine. And with that vaccine, her rabies vaccine, she was given a microchip with a number. Without our consent. Nobody asked us if we wanted our little kitten microchipped. And now she has this like gadget, because when she gets the vaccine, in the vaccine needle is this nanotechnology that tracks her for the rest of her life. She will be trackable. Now my horse, when I bought my female horse, she is also microchipped. So there's something very strange about this, that the animals are being microchipped when they're vaccinated, and they can be tracked. Their breeding is recorded. So if you're a breeding mare, they will track you and your line. Now that's interesting, except of course the males are being microchipped too. And what this feels like to me is this era of the Father God, who was going to question anything that was women's sacred private life. So Father God basically set out clerical weapons, which are like priests and other judges, who debated all the time about women being employed by the devil. So basically these judges, these priests, would torture the woman to find out how many imps meaning like these little demonic creatures, she had employed, how many times she had intercourse with the devil, and the exact size and length of his member, meaning the size of his penis. They also would kill the woman, no matter what she said, how many imps and how many times she had sex with the devil, who was Dionysus, by the way, but they called it Lucifer. But that was the ritual of women, was that the women used their sexual energy for an ecstasy, and they would get into like a sexual frenzy around this god Dionysus. So the cleric weapons of the patriarchy would be like, how many times did you have sex with the devil? How big was his penis? While she was being tortured. This is astounding herstory for me. And certainly it's very interesting to what is happening right now, which is why I'm making this comparison. Women also were in charge of the grain and how much grain would feed the community over the whole winter. And they raised cats in particular. The cats were like watching the granary so that the rats and other creatures weren't eating all the grain or, pooping in it, which ruined the grain. And when they were tortured, their cat would be taken too. And they would kill the cat with the woman because they truly believed that the woman could come back in her spirit form through her power animal, her cat. So even to this day, like my daughter got a little both of my daughters have black cats. They had to ask them special questions to make sure that they weren't going to torture that cat on a Samhain. And so my daughter got a kitten in October, and it was like, are you part of some kind of weird animal sacrifice? And that goes all the way back to when women were being questioned, tortured, and killed with their cats, when their cats were just something that protected the grain. This is astounding to me. So our cats, again, are leading the way on getting a vaccine and having a microchip implanted. And according to Dr. Christiane Northrup, who has written 3 books on women's health, gynecology, our wisdom in our bodies, and our body autonomy, our rights, she's written those books about women's sanctity, the sacred womb. And she has recently come out saying that the new vaccination that is only for the original Wuhan virus strain being put forth by Pfizer, which is corporate medical, and as far as I'm concerned, weaponized corporate medical. And she said that it has nanotechnology in it that will track us, know our location, know who we've had sex with, how big his member was. I mean, that was like crazy, like back to the witch hunts. We'll know everything about us, will be our currency and tie us to cryptocurrency. And some people say, oh, there's no way they can afford all that nanotechnology. Well, they can afford it for my cat without my permission. Very inexpensive to get a rabies vaccine and microchipped. So they can afford it in my cat. I think that they probably do have this program for all of humankind. And then they also have this like light-bearing information in the nanotechnology that will scan you for, again, who you've had sex with, where you've been going, what you've been eating, and tie you to a cryptocurrency. Now that sounds way out there. But if you go back in our history, that was the original torture and questioning of all women. They were all suspect. And to have any autonomy around their own health was, or medicine or rituals was not allowed. And this is basically what this new vaccine technology is. Now, a lot of people want a vaccine because they don't like the amount of suffering and death that's happening. But let me tell you, this virus has mutated many times and is a highly mutable virus. Obviously, it came from a mutation of the coronavirus, which is related to the rabies virus, which I wrote about with the help of the Galactic Shaman Astrologers way back in February. And we've been tracking this and watching very carefully how it now has 16 different variations. There is no vaccine that's going to cover those 16 different variations. And still today, people are dying of respiratory illnesses that don't come up as COVID because it's already mutated again. So no vaccine is going to cover it. Now, where I'm going with this is Holly, who is a brilliant astrologer, shaman, and has medical background. She, hopefully she'll speak to this herself, but she has also indicated that 4th house, our ancestry, is tied to our DNA, so that when we are messing around like this, by messing around with the virome, which the human DNA is 50% from viruses, we are again messing with our ancestry and our DNA. I feel like that intervention is potentially dangerous, and we've already got enough autism and chronic disease that is the result of messing with our DNA, that this is going to be another level of lack of sovereignty, really, which is what this whole book is about. The invasion into the sovereignty of the feminine. I'm trying to make this video as quick as possible. I'm pulling together a whole bunch of things that I've learned from my clients and from this reading. The last thing that I want to say to you before we as the Galactic Shaman Astrologers meet is that many of my clients have children who are depressed, anxious, and even suicidal. And some of them are in rehab centers. Some of them are just suffering alone. I want to tell you an epiphany that I had last night. These children are not going to do the old structures. They will refuse to their own martyrdom and death to do the old structures. So listen to that very carefully. I read in this book that during the time of the patriarchal invasion, many of the matriarchal priestesses, like a count of 13 priestesses, chose to do a death meditation and die rather than give up their private secrets of the original knowledge of womanhood. And there are burials and caves with 13 women sitting in a circle with evidence of poppies and poppy seeds where they took a lot of poppy opium and they killed themselves. They died a ritual death rather than go through these tortures, these DNA interventions, rather than reveal some of the things that the clerics were asking them, because their knowledge was sacred and needed to be protected. So many of the kids are trying to leave right now by overdose through these different kinds of heroin, opiate, even antidepressants and things like that. And I do think it's because they will not take another invasion, nor will they do the old system. They will not do the old dependency structures. They will not do the old way of being a slave to wages and being dependent upon the government. They will live in their tiny house and they will travel nomadic lifestyles or get a van and drive around rather than work at a corporate job. And they will do that to the point of martyrdom or death. And I'm finding a lot of little kids as young as 12 years old are refusing to do the old system. And that, to me, feels a lot like the death rituals that these priestesses took on. Now, I'm, of course, not suggesting any of us do that. But what I am suggesting is that we hold this space as communities like those matriarchal wise women did and refuse this microchipping stuff that comes with your vaccine. Now, is there a lot of nanotechnology? Yes, we know that nanotechnology is sprayed from the sky. We've seen it on tomatoes. There's these little parasitic machine type things called organelles, which have been shown to be on those mass-produced crops that are just sprayed, and there is already nanotechnology. But I feel like having a tracking device that ties you to currency is another major intervention into the divine, beautiful fourth house ancestry of the socially relating, Libran, giving and taking, harmonizing human. And the galactic shaman astrologers will explain more of that to you. But I wanted to get this conversation going today, right now, while Athena is overcoming Jupiter and Venus is still in a square to Saturn. The energy right now is still like crisis. We have to figure this out. And I'm going to leave it up to you. You know, if your fear is so dependent upon getting a vaccine, just know that the strains of both the flu and coronavirus and many of the other fast-moving, mutating viruses are totally different, like the minute after you just got that vaccine. Okay, so what they're really possibly injecting you with are a lot of toxic metals, chemicals, microchipping that can track you. And like these invading clerics of Yahweh's interdimensional takeover of our beautiful planet, they had just sick proceedings where they were asking horrifying questions of women. And some of these priestesses would sit a death meditation rather than submit to that. And I do think that that is some of why the children just refuse, the young people refuse to do those corporate jobs, and they refuse to go to school. They refuse to be in debt. They refuse to do the classical religious, like monogamy with one partner and two kids living in domestic arrangement. It's amazing. Just take all of this in, and if you can, get a copy of this book. This book is my reference forever on our ancestry and origins of the human, beautiful, beloved family. All of us were female once, and we had to fight to be male. So remember that. That's astounding to me and gives me so much compassion for the fear that men have of the power of women. Okay, loves. See you soon.